Thank you very much for the invitation. So it's a pleasure to change and switch so easily between nations, and should be done more often. And yes, this is Feld 72. We are a studio made up by 5 partners, and we are approximately 30 people right now. 5 partners we started 15 years ago, are still best friends, so this is our biggest achievement. And so we are a generation which was grown up in different parts of Europe, and we have been educated in the moment when a new kind of Europe was shaped, a new possibility arose, and the medium of computer finally took a very important step also into the education. So we had the mixture between hand-educated education and computers, and we these different backgrounds where the 5 partners are from. 2 are from Italy, 1 is from France, 1 is from Australia, then switching to Austria, and just 1 is from Austria, and made it quite clear for us that we are coming from complete different kind of traditions, and that we have to find a way to communicate with each other. So a lot of the conceptual nature of our work maybe has also to do that we have to talk with each other, and we have to find reasonable stuff to be able to communicate. So from the first start, and when we started our office, we started with nothing and with one-to-one project, and then parallelly through the nature of competition we were able to get bigger commissions, etc. So and this parallelity of things is still very important today for our office and for our practice. And the little universe I'm showing today it's not a sequence of time, but it's a parallelity, and it's a step from very small to large, which I will show you, but it's important for us. We are making from architecture to urbanism to social design to things which are in certain nations and throughout certain fields are considered as art, whereas the same thing is considered urbanism in other fields. So it has really to do who does read the work and in which cultural context it is read. But for us, it's always us in terms we are looking at the world from always with the same kind of perspective, and the nature of our questioning sometimes led to certain kind of architecture projects which can be perceived in different ways. So we were very happy also to be able to engage in different contexts. So a few of the projects have brought us a little bit more far away, but most of the projects which we have done and we are recently doing are in Europe. And this kind of bubble of things is that what drives us along. And I will then go deeper in this kind of different project. So the transdisciplinarity is something which is a very ancient topic, obviously, in architecture. It's just that we have forgotten it. And this kind of the bourgeois architects is also quite a recent invention, and so it's also one of the. I think maybe if you have finished your work and you go into reality, you might find it quite difficult, etc. But you have also to think that you are one of the first generations that has this incredible access to the possibility to be an architect, and you're living in one of the most interesting times ever. And obviously you know that to live in some interesting times, it was a bad say for Chinese people. So if they want to say that you have to live really, really hard times, so may you live in interesting times. So these are interesting times, but it also means that it has to do with a lot of incredible invention which are blowing away the nature of that what we call our discipline. And it's not banal to think outside of the box, but it's not something which you just can afford as a luxury, but I think it's really, really important. If you want to understand our cities, you have to understand what Amazon is doing. You have to understand the transformation of public spaces throughout the realm of the digital, etc. So it's not just, you cannot hide yourself just in the reality of the Aldo Rossi say architecture is just architecture. It may be in the grammar of that what the discipline has arrived, but the events which are transforming the cities and therefore also architecture are very, 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 very big this time. But anyway, so that's what influenced us. So right now I make a passage from things which might not seem like architecture, but They were really important for our thinkers, and they are still, and for us it is architecture already. And a very influential time for us were the 60s, and because there was a moment when people tried to re-achieve emancipation and trying to understand what's their own role in the world and how they can create tools how to make the world a better place. And one of these crazy people trying to make tools was Stuart Brand. And Stuart Brand, based on an essay by Buckminster Fuller, which wrote that the inhabitants of islands are fully aware of any kind of resources of island, and they understand their environment very well. And he said, as a matter of fact, also the planet and the globe is just as an island, and the moment when the people will be aware of it, it might be that there might be a new awareness of relations, of resources, of limits, and of borders. So Stuart Brand was a young student of, I think, biology or chemistry, but also a very wild person in mind. And he started a process trying to gain conscious and perception. And he knew that through the Apollo program there was already the picture of the Earth made, but it was never published. So he started with the little stickers, a tentative of a revolution. And he made stickers with the question, why haven't we seen a photograph of the whole Earth yet? And this little sticker, which costs just a few euros right now, and if you make it thousands, it costs you a few hundred euros, was a tentative to change the world by changing the perception. And he got the picture with the permission of a lot of scientists. And for us, already, it's a banal picture, but for your parents and your grandparents, it was a revolution, and it was a crash of 5,000 years of human history to understand what it is. But the interesting part, and then it comes to architecture and urbanism, is how they put it together and created a kind of a tool catalog, which was the whole Earth catalog, which became the blueprint then of that what we know maybe as the internet, and became very important for this California thinking, which is shaping our world obviously today. But again, very banal for us today. We don't understand it anymore because in its all complexity, it becomes a very banal picture of that or this. Obviously, the whole generation knows what participation is, what is kind of common ground is, because all the tools which have been fabricated already and the terms of platform, etc., are very well known to you. And I think that's a very, very crucial moment exactly for those like you which are starting right now. Because throughout this new media, a lot of topics which had to do with how you understand the city have been already declined in that what platforms, application, etc. So there's a whole new language of the outer world which understands already what you're doing. But that what is also very interesting is the analog power of things. And that was very interesting for our work. And this is a globe made by our friends in Rome, Stalker, which tried to understand the world just by walking and by getting on the ground. And that was something which was also very important for our work. So this was an invitation once in the Biennale of Venice, where we tried to make a little kind of universe. But this tentative of finding tools to understand the nature of space was something which we showed already in our first works, where we tried to understand places and tried to find media to understand places, here with stickers, where it was all about to understand the transformation of public space, especially here in Sao Paulo, etc. Or like a one-day architecture, which obviously had a few more days just to program it, but it was a tentative to understand places together throughout the notion of architecture and through the consolidation of a ritual. So this was a work, how do I go back here? I just made a very switch call. It was a work in a border region between Austria, Slovenia and Italy. And it was a work to places which are in the middle of Europe, but have, by economical reasons, have been completely transformed. And it was a project which we did in two villages. One was called Mogesa di qua, the other one Mogesa di là, which means Mogesa here, Mogesa there. But they have undergone an incredible kind of transformation right now. They have gone out of inhabitants, and then throughout the Balkan wars, a lot of people which try to find a home next to this kind of borders, find it in that little village. So it was a topic which we were interested in. It's like to bring people together to the manifestation of architecture itself, and throughout the mapping of the little villages, if you put the map in a different way, we created this kind of little box of memory, which was nothing else than a big camera obscura, which then remained in place. The notion of that architecture is changed by rules which are outside of architecture itself. Obviously, you know it already from the 60s when Venturi wrote Learning from Las Vegas. But something more important is that politics can obviously change these laws again. So in 2007, Gilberto Casap, which was the mayor of Sao Paulo, just with one law, made it impossible for a decorated shed of Robert Venturi to be built in the area of Greater Sao Paulo, which is where there are about 60 million people living, just by simply prohibiting any kind of advertisement. So it's a city where all the traces of information beyond lights from, like the lights of the city, they look just like this with any kind of advertisement anymore. And it really looks like one of these Italo Calvino invisible cities where there's just one phenomena which is or exaggerated or taken away in the narrative of the city. But that what was very important is when we were going there, we made our research there, is that capital stroke back in a certain way. And the poor inhabitants of the favelas are given a few bucks to go around with advertisement and even transforming themselves as the ultimate sign system. And we have seen people which have had graffitis which were paid off. But also this one reflects the nature, obviously, of that what public space is. This possibility of communicating on one side, all the notions of illegality, etc. So these are all projects which had to do exactly with this re-questioning that what public space is in a contemporary society. This is FileKit, which was a little tool to work with traffic jams. And it was a tool against the promise of the street in a certain way. So every traffic jam, like 10 years ago, the only response to traffic jams was to make other streets, and new streets causes new traffic jams. So it's a constant system which regenerated itself. So we were asking ourselves, why don't we use this incredible power of this frozen moment and create communication in between so that at least something could arise out of this system. So the question was really how to make communication in an informal society like the Dutch one possible, and we used the capitalist power of the product, which has confidence because you think there's an industry behind, etc. So anyway, this was the magical moment when this survival kit for traffic jam victims was going inside, and it was just a tool trying to expand the possibilities between action and non-action. So also at the beginning of our practice, we were doing a lot of participatory process in public space. This was in front of the Museumsquartier. And then we continued to other projects where it had some similar notions, but it was a project which remained in time. So this was a bus stop, which we did in Lower Austria, which was also a possibility to reorder a public square in a little village. And what was very interesting is that people didn't want any kind of changement, and they just wanted parking spaces. So that what we did was that every second, where's the little light? So that the only parameters were just 2.5 meters per 5 meters. So we made the whole square, the continuous, where every second parking lot was different and did not look like a parking lot. So, but everybody in that village knew that. So he could take his Porsche Cayenne and park there. But if you're a foreigner, you don't know it, and you have to dare much more. And our idea was, because they just wanted parking lots, and it was so absurd that they didn't understand their own possibility of that, what a public space, the only public space in their little village could be. And so we offered like this Trojan horse, and then slowly changed to something else. And also here, obviously, this is the bus stop, but it should have also possibility, 90% daily life, but it is a terrace where the chorus is singing, where people could hang around, and they used it already as a theater stage, so that it really becomes this little moment in time, and the little kids. So villages are very nice if you're young, and then you become extremely uncool. And obviously this was the place where you smoke your first pot, etc. So but that you have an idea of something else, again, into that system. Or other project which we did in public space. This was a project where we tried to expand the possibilities of tool for public space in China. This was an invitation for Shenzhen, a city where we deeply made a research, and the most shocking thing about that city was that bikes were forbidden because they were symbol for poorness. And if you go in a bike shop in Western Europe, you will find out that it's not a symbol of poorness, but the complete opposite. But as a matter of fact, a bike in China, the bike in Europe have the same qualities. And so we tried to work with other parameters which we found there on site, and we found out that there were a lot of tree bikes which were allowed because they generated economy, which were just used to sell stuff. And we wanted to expand them with other notions of that what public space could also be about. So the possibility to speak, obviously, if you create tools, they are morally ambiguous, and you can also use it also for propaganda, or like an analog karaoke machine. So where you took the main concept of the main enemy, the Japanese, and to bring it into China, and see how people are reacting, and bring it in this very, very monothematic city where it's just about commerce or living, but in an incredible area, and in an incredible area of exaggeration. So a city which is 30 years old, which has already 50 million people, but which has not yet any tradition of that what the potential of public space could be. So this notion of tools, we broke it on, and also to other cities with different topics. This was an invitation to London, where we reflected the transformation of a certain area where the Olympics took place, and it was a project about surveillance in public space, or to Milan, where we used it obviously in a complete different way. So a lot of this project had to deal with the idea of agora, that you have something which enables you to create a public sphere. So this was an invitation for Graz for a festival center, and we tried to put it on the outside, like and renting 5,000 euro pallets, and creating a space which has place for normal daily events, but also for very special ones. And in this kind of in-between scene with the art scene itself, we were also able to get into the institutional part of the art and make also exhibitions, etc. But this constant quest of that, what the city is capable of, brought us to different places, and with complete different kind of concept, not just conceptual approach, but with phenomena which look completely similar, but were completely the opposite of each other. This was a project which we did in Hoofvliet in Holland, but I will go deeper into another project where we see this kind of in-between access. This was like a portfolio access to be able to show the freedom of the transformation of certain kind of cities with another way. So this is in your neighborhood. This is Aspern, the new part of Vienna, with approximately 40,000 people living in this promise of a new city. And the city of Vienna made a competition for the rules for the public space, which was a very interesting competition, a European-wide competition where the rules, how the public space should be structured, were completely newly established. And the idea was, how could you create areas of public space where you could have communication, etc., everything people wanted in that area. So we participated in the competition, and we won the second prize with the run to the first prize, and Jan Gehl, very prominent figure of public space, won it. But the interesting thing, that took a lot of our concept, and which were not part of Jan Gehl's project, but we found important, and it was really also interesting to see it now taking place. So one of the main ideas was the city of Vienna had a concept, and the city of Vienna is very famous for housing projects. And the strategy of the city of Vienna for housing is the strategy for urbanism. So the housing plots are the tool with which the city of Vienna creates urbanism, and I will go to that deeper in the housing project itself. So there was this promise of this new city coming up, and 40,000 people is more or less the size of Siena in its best moment in time. And as you know, still today you go to Siena because it's a fantastic city, but everybody of us knows that most of our cities which are building today will unfortunately, or at least not yet, have the power of these cities. And we knew already what would come. So this is a city where you could create fantastic housing projects, but just housing project alone will never make a city. And there was the bubble of creative city in these years over this new development of the city. So the promise that's a new city where you have cheap access to apartment, where you have cheap access to education, where you have a large amount of investments funded by the state and by private companies in this kind of target future technologies, where you have the possibility of migrants to take part in it, etc. So that these kind of cities would create a welfare and an incredible possibilities. So everybody wanted to become San Francisco, nobody wanted to become Marseille. And the question was, how could you deal with it, and how could you really do it? So the notion for this development of the area was also that a lot of creative people would go there. So there was this kind of, this fake narrative in a certain way, and everybody, we were asking, because we said we are also part of the creative industry, would anybody of us ever go to that place? And we had really like 100% of no's in our friends, which had to do with programming, which had to do with the arts, etc. And we said, isn't it sarcastic to participate in a competition where you know that the main target you will never achieve? So we focused all our intention to use the strategy for public space to communicate something else. So if you want to have the families going to the city, you have to just make the green area, you have to have cheap rents or cheap apartments, and you will see that people from the neighborhood will come because there is a normal pressure on the housing market. But if you want something else there, you have to focus on some kind of target groups. And if you want to have creative people, you have to focus on a few creative people which will attract other creative, like peer groups, and it will become more and more. So the question was, so there were two questions behind that. This is a city which is just finished because it's based on the circular model of old Vienna. So it means the city is just finished when the circle is finished. And right now we are building this part of the city. And we only can just hope that there is no economic crisis, because if not, it will remain this little bastard with no reconnection to the periphery, because the periphery next to that place is full of single-story houses of people which escaped the city, and now the city is coming and having 6 floors. And the question was once, how can you work with an unfinished idea of city, and how can you put on an evolutionary process of winning situations into that, and how can you attract pioneers? Normally, you attract pioneers by giving them free spaces, and normally you have to do with fucked up areas, cheap rents or free rent, and you bring it there. Here you have the complete opposite. You have no houses, you have nothing. The only thing which you have is free space, a lot of free space. So we made a program where everybody which is starting here, as this part is not yet built, receives a plot of public space where you could really experiment, knowing that it will disappear in 10 years. But in these 10 years, you create a special kind of freedom. Like the Chinese did with a special economic zone, here you create a kind of special creative zones with a certain kind of regulation, so that you attract people which specifically find something which they could never find in any other part of the city, because it's very hard to compete with the city center of Vienna. So you have to offer something more, and then slowly, through phases, you could attract more and more people. And the interesting part for us was, if you have programs which in a certain way survive economically, the master plan should be so flexible that you put them into the actual master plan and you let the survivors in. So it's the same problem as that what happens with Berlin, etc. So they have a process of access and working also with relicts. Another approach which shows how we are dealing with questions which are a little bit in between architecture and urbanism was an invitation where we were 5 teams, Kees Christians, etc., to work on the notion of the new city area of Frankfurt Rhine-Main. And we were invited to work with this kind of diffuse area. And because it's a typical situation where if you look at the area with innocent eyes, it looks that there is no problem. You fly over this mega city and you wonder why it doesn't have one name. And but then if you go into the history, you find out it's a very complicated history which had to do with tribes fighting each other until recently. But this kind of regulations and fragmentation of the territory creates incredible economical problems, etc. So we wanted to go back to the old Pax Romana in a certain way. So when Augustus made the Pax Romana, he created an empire which was based on 2 kinds of liberties. So the state guaranteed infrastructure and asked for taxes. But you could have parallelity of rain system, and everybody of you knowing or being familiar with Christian history, you know that during that time, which is described in the New Testament, this is not, this may be the only things which we know for sure, it's that there were 2 people, one was reigning, one was Pilatus, and one was Herodes, so the other one was the representative of the Roman Empire, and one was the parallel power. So this parallelity of things, and this kind of, they created an enormous kind of glue, and it made it very successful. So there is nothing less distant from Roman Empire than Italy right now, because Italy is everything which is missing in Italy is infrastructure, and everything which is missing is somebody pays the taxes. But in this kind of global glue, we found a possibility, because it's a place where a lot of highly educated migrants are coming and also poorer ones are coming, and they're seeing the territory very pragmatically and try to find possibilities. I don't go deeper into that kind of strategy, but what we did, we created an app for a territory which helps you to go through the territory and achieve points by being a citizen of that territory. And I will show it then deeper. But parallel to that, we wanted to open up spaces, and also here it's not important just to make a research, but for us it's also important to get on the ground, to make things happen, to open up this huge infrastructure space for other needs. And we made workshop discussions and experiments also already on the ground. And parallel to that, we went further with how's it called, the Museum of Architecture, and still go on with re-questioning the territory, but going directly to the leaders of infrastructure. And that led us to another idea, with the idea of the apps. We then were able to get fundings, and we invented an apps for urbanism in Vienna, which in a certain way uses the power of bikes and to conquer space and to get points and access in the city by having more and more. So this will be in action in spring. We put a lot of effort in that. So in this kind of parallelity of things between re-questioning, going into the education, working with public space, we developed certain kind of topics which we are constantly able, or we try to put it also in our build projects, which I will show you right now. So Vienna is undergoing a major transformation right now. We have 30,000 people coming every year trying to stay there in Vienna. So we have 37% of people which are non-Austrians right now living in the city. And if you compare it to the magical moment when it was a laboratory of modernity, and if you go back 100 years when it had already 2 million, 50% of the inhabitants of Vienna were non-Austrians. But it was a really pushy time, obviously, because there were people trying to create a photon right now. And in this kind of moment right now, it's very interesting to see what the housing projects put into the discourse, and we were very fortunate to be able to make a few in the cities, which we are right now building. Right now we are building approximately 800 to 900 apartments in Vienna, and a lot of these deal with complete different kind of typologies of living, and the mixture between living and working, which generates also the potential for a newer society. So, and I will show a few of them which have a certain kind of topic, where you have different kinds of clients which create obviously a different kind of approach. This is a project which we made together with Alles für Gut to the social housing, also at the end of the city, which becomes throughout the metro, which is going here, which has been recently built. Everything along this kind of metros is seen by investors as very, very next to city center, and there is an incredible kind of urbanization going around these areas. Not always good, but throughout the work you see also the different worlds which are matching each other. So this is the found area of Trans-Danubia, where you see little tentatives of founding your own single happiness, and here comes the big impact of the city itself. So we tried also to make a project, this is social housing, where it try at least to find a way to let these two worlds communicate. And obviously here we have to deal with people which you will never know. Normally we are used to work with people which we know. We find participatory process, how we can get in touch with possible inhabitants, how you can, in a certain way, finding an architectural language where they could fit in and they could even participate. But this is a complete different social relation which you have, because it's made by people which are renting the space, which have an enormous amount of fluctuation, very poor people, and so it's like a transmitting zone. And what we tried was to create an environment where there were a lot of different kind of typologies of how you live put together. So you have the classical patchwork biographies of fathers and mothers which have their sons or their daughters just on the weekend or during the week. So you always have these parallelities of little extra spaces which you can transform. Or you have clans in a certain way. You have bigger families coming from maybe different cultures which are working together. Or you have, in this specific case, you had women which have been abused, and they try to live together, etc. So you have to create architecture in an enormous amount of flexibility, and obviously it's not always fitting, but at least you create a tentative to go into these kind of new realities, and then obviously you try to make as much as communication rooms, etc., as possible. And so you make also bigger kitchens, you make the washing rooms next to the areas where people could stay, etc. So obviously Austria has a big advantage being in a certain way just by wording. So communal, so living together and social housing is not automatically directed to communism, so it has a complete different kind of branding, obviously. It's seen as something else, and the social and the housing strategy of the city of Vienna was not just for the poor, but was a middle class program. So you have really access to the rent, to the spaces offered by the municipality of Vienna, also with quite a high income. So that means the target group was really just to create a new kind of society, but being social democratic in a certain way. And this is one reality, and then you have the really private, high segmented market as well. But this is also the reason why the city of Vienna can control gentrification, because they control the maximum of rent, and they can also control that people stay in certain kind of places. So it has not to deal with this enormous kind of waves of distractions which are transforming cities like Paris, etc. But it was able to integrate an enormous flow of migrants during the last period without any kind of, at least visual conflict. So that's also some kind of achievement. And it is said that the biggest problem of Vienna is that it has no problems. But the weird thing is that people don't understand how many people are working behind that this city has no problems. So in a certain way, it's also an ambiguous situation, because in a certain way you create a society which is very protected by like a strong father or mother, and has kind of teenage attitudes to be drunken or make a revolution, but anyway the father or the mother pays everything. So I'm not sure if it's a resilient society. I think it's very well done until the money goes on. But then it's an open question if you can create a really solid kind of society which is based on self-emancipation as well. So this is another project which is the transformation of a former brownfield. This is in the northern end of Vienna, a former area with kind of gas facilities, you see it here, and with old facilities from the K&K Empire yet, and then some kind of very interesting buildings of the 50s and 60s. And it was an area which was discovered by urban activists, and then the city of Vienna got interested, and now they are building also here a new part of the city. So this is the area here, and some areas of the K&K Empire have remained, some have been pushed down, and this will be the new area, and this is our building there. So an incredible atmosphere of wilderness, and obviously a place at the end of the world. So it takes you quite a while to go there. And every of these competition is not just an architecture competition. So you're not as an architect alone, but you go together with an investor. And the interesting thing is really how the world of investors, at least in Vienna, changed enormously. So also when we had the meetings here with the investors, it was like being an urban sociology seminar in New York in the 70s, because all the questions which were arising from them and all the openness to certain kind of discourse was just amazing. And you really felt that there was a transformation of society going on where certain kind of topics have become mainstream, and that's also super, super important. So the topic of being able to participate, to see the possibility to work and live together, to find environments which stimulate also the possibility to work. And although we had really, really low budget, we were able to create a logic how we could read it differently. So the main question was, who is going to live there? No? So it's at the end of the world, why should you go to live there? And the second one is, in a certain way, you are living in a certain kind of island. And it's with a very interesting, quite fancy aesthetics. And the main question for us, I don't go into the detail, but just so conceptually, was to create an extra zone. An extra zone which was a gift. So for the same price, we were able to give everybody special rooms. And these kind of special rooms should be on the friction between the public space inside the building and your own apartment. And this kind of, and you should use it as you want it. So for exhibition, for cooking, for having your stamp collection, your synthesizer, your music, or having a different kind of approach. And in this very low budget situation, so we are really able to inscribe it in the program. So this is built like this. So there are no rooms, no doors of their flats. So they are really this kind of open situations, and the closed room, it's just behind that kind of door. So that we really try to invite people to this environment which would love, because they are distant from city and there is this kind of wild environment where there are a lot of pioneers are going there, so that they could find a way to transform it. And then we found a way with the regulations that we were able to within the framework, to create apartments which were like 4.5 meters high. Some of them are even 5.5, and where we were able to put in a do-it-yourself framework, also a second floor in it, but for the same price as is classical smart livings. Another topic which we are dealing with, this is a project of 450 apartments, which is obviously an amazing amount of numbers. But it's one of the first where the city of Vienna again with a lot of program enters the discourse. So we wanted to make a reference to the old courtyards like 100 years ago, but also with different kind of access and programming. But that's what we wanted to create was a very big, also open space like a forest in the middle of the settlement, and where we could create also a quality in an area which was neither fish nor flesh. And so the idea was really to work on communication. We have a lot of public spaces around this kind of apartments. Obviously, the apartment well designed, as every apartment is well designed by most of the good architects. But the point is really how can you create communication in this kind of very, very dense environment, and how can you create qualities? And first of all, so after the building is just before the living. And that means that you have to create also programming, social programming, how you're able to from the beginning to work with people on place, with institutions, so that all these kind of network situations are put on the ground already before something is going on. This is another project where we were able to experiment something in a new area of Vienna, which is in the former south station of Vienna, which is now the main station of Vienna. So there was this kind of huge area where just the trays were, and we have Sonnenwend Viertel number 1, which is the area number 1, and then we have the number 2. And what was very interesting as a strategy of the city of Vienna was that this was also a very interesting area with very interesting architects promoting very social compatible architecture. But what you see here is the different size of blocks. And the city of Vienna decided we want to go deeper. We want to have more control of that what a city is. This is a classical block for investors, 120 apartments. And here you frame it and it's like 40 to 60. But it becomes a different scale of the city itself. And they wanted to make an experiment to go deeper, to have more control of that what a city is. And they created the so-called Quartiershäuser, which is houses for the quartier, or for the zone. And these houses, additional to be in competition of investor and architects, there is a second agent entering in the competition, which is the one which takes responsibility of the program of the ground zone. Normally, when you draw a building, you write whatever restaurant or bike station or bike service or internet company on your plan. But this is just a promise which will never happen, or just very, very seldom happens. But a city obviously is just made of this, what happens on the ground floor, what communicates with the street, etc. And to have more control of that and to create a panorama of different functions, the city of Vienna entered in a new kind of programming. And so when we were competing with others, we had already two kind of, how can we, not investors, entrepreneurs, which have already signed that they would do this kind of things in the ground floor, which was really important for the building itself. So the building has two levels. Sorry, again I'm making the complete mad thing. So on the ground floor you have the signed entrepreneur, which is, here we had a dance school for kids and teenagers, and we had the vegan restaurant, which is bringing the food to the companies around, like the best of a politically correct winner. But anyway, we won then, but not just for that. But and then we had a tentative of putting all the social programs of the house. We have library, kids space, we have urban gardening, etc. In a very dense place, and to densify it, and then to use to make two big public gardens and also the area in front, and then to be able to control the area itself. So also here, very regulated price, but you have the, here you see it very well. This is the proscenium. This is all public spaces. These are all big spaces for the public, library, kids space on 2 floors, and a working space, so that everybody, also if you work here, you have constant access to all these rooms. Then you have the view up with urban gardening, etc. And then you have the access here to dance, and also this is transformed into something else in the exhibition, etc. So, but it was really a tentative of densifying this kind of functions and to make them more valuable. So this is still before use, so you see just the empty spaces, and but also here a tentative of seeing it also as a tool of social condensation. So this will be green then, this is the chillarium, and up there is the bigger garden where everybody has its own part of it. Another Quartiershaus which we recently won, and we are trying to, right now we are putting into one-to-one, is the Wogen Quartiershaus, which was a very interesting initiative to have a client which thinks absolutely radical of that what living of tomorrow might be. And we made it together with Wogen, with Raum und Communication, with Transparadiso. And that what we tried is to make a competition for 2 plots and to treat them as one. And the main thing is that we create a base which is a huge fab lab, which is a very big working space. So we have like 4.5 meters of working space, and then we have cluster apartments. I will go deeper in that. So this is beyond typical living, and we have here the possibilities of everybody to have access to big machines. You can become really dirty. You can experiment, and then you have in the upper floor you have very small apartments which are put together in clusters. So this is the conventional minimum of Vienna is 25 square meters and 2.5 meters. So more or less for a little bit more price we were able to have 4.5 meters, and we have an extra of potential 15 square meters. And then you have access to co-working, and then you have a deposit, and then you have even the big working area below. So you could transform it as you want. So you have a cell of kitchen and bathrooms, and then you have a sleeping area, etc. But you can also just use the whole height in a different way. And then like 7 of these apartments form a mega apartment, which is 4.5 meters high, where you have collective kitchen, you have different kind of baths here, you have sauna, etc. Then you have areas where you can chill out. So the idea was really to bring people together which have intimacy on one side, but also collectiveness on the other side. And in that part of the house where we have just the standard 3 meter high, this is a possibility of older people living together with young people, or also with assistants, etc. So, and with this kind of window we tried to expand the space. Here you see the potential of living of generations together, but really this is now in progress, and it's very interesting because here it's really all about how can you collectively have more than just to be a single individual. So you pay a low budget price, but you get a lot out of it. This is a classical transformation of the sharing industry into a house where you have guest room, sauna, all the arsenal of that what was primarily the art in the 60s, which become mainstream right now, like urban gardening, etc. So this is a project in a different city with a complete different society, or let's say with a micro society which was even more different. It's a project where we invited to Hamburg and to one of the most wild, noisy, fucked up, but most interesting parts of the city, to St. Pauli. I don't know if you have ever been there. So St. Pauli, it's a territory on its own, with an enormous amount of subculture, prostitution, a known football club with the pirate symbol. So the symbol of the pirate is exactly how the whole area sees itself. So very left-wing orientated area, but full of signs, etc. And there were these so-called Esso houses. The Esso houses were famous because they were at the beginning of the entrance. This is the entrance. It's a big square in St. Pauli, and for a very special milieu. So you have very important clubs there. You had social housing with quite poor people, and then you have the famous Esso station, which was not that famous because of fuel, but because of alcohol. because it was the only thing where you could get it always. And so a big investor came to that part of the city and bought that part. So there was alarm in the area, and the people were really afraid that they had to move away because they knew that potentially you could build much more volume on that square, and the investor obviously had an interest to get also money out of that. So the whole city moved to protest. There were concerts with 20,000 people to fight for their rights to the city itself. But then they had counter kind of scientific improvement that this area, that it could work. But investor had the problem that they were afraid that they were crashing down. And so there was one night when people had to excavate the city because there was danger of falling into pieces. And a few months later, this thing happened and the area was destroyed. So, and then there came a very interesting moment between the city and between the people on site, and between activists which have been already glorious like 15 years ago. And so people on the streets, together with sociologists, together with artists and the city, tried to find a way of negotiation. And they established a Planbude, which is an area where people could communicate with each other. And 2,000 people participated in this kind of participatory process. So the main message was, okay, you're coming here, you invest your money, but we don't want our area be transformed, gentrified, etc. So we impose you a few rules. And these rules were called the St. Pauli Code. So it was a code of conduct which should be inscribed in the architecture itself. And they invited 8 teams from all over Europe to make first a master plan for the area where we had all to take care of the program itself, but mainly also about the St. Pauli Code. So the area, so that means St. Pauli Code was place for experiment and subculture, so low budget before luxury, then originality and tolerance, appropriation and vibrancy, so that you create something where you could really, so that it's not finished, so that it looks already in a certain way fucked up before it's even new. Diversity before homogeneity, and very important, open space without the pressure of consuming. So, and obviously they wanted small scale structures, so a city which is made out of all these elements. And so we took first part in the master planning. So master plan obviously is just about games and rules, how you could make a city, and it's not about specificity, it's not about singularity, but it's about the possibility that if you don't get a master plan, at least if somebody takes it, it doesn't fall down, but it has a certain kind of coherency. And they told us that the first 3 will get the permission to participate in the building competition, so we were third. The first one was NL Architects and Bell together. And then they added 2 others, which were not, the competition didn't make the requested square, so they added also Lacaton Vasal and Jesko Feser and IFAO, which were very well-known architects also there for housing, to make a competition. And it was also an interesting moment because we all said we don't want a competition anymore because we are 5 teams. And if you want heterogeneity, if you want an area which is vivid and different, nobody of us is able to be so schizophrenic that you can make so different parts within a plot. So you have already the perfect match. We know each other, we respect each other, we are able to transform it in our way. So really a moment where normally it doesn't happen. But the investor said, no, I want you to suffer. No? And they gave us micro competitions. So at the end, 1 left. So at the end, we are 4 teams. We were able to win more plots, fortunately for us, unfortunately for somebody else. And then this came out. So we practically, we are dealing with a street. So this is NL Architects, which makes, so this is our plot here, and this is the proposal for the others, but this has changed obviously because it was made then by other architects. So practically, and the architects won because they said, the master plan said we have to create a square, and they said there is no need for a square next to a huge square, we need a street. So they won with the project of street, so all of us then focused on the street itself. So we have this very specific situation of the clubs, skater park, rock and roll hotel, and then you go through it, and then you have this special room and escalators and climbing, etc. Then we have hostels, and then we have a Baugruppe, which has to do with a lot of communal spaces, and then you have low budget housing. So very difficult to deal with all these kind of rules, and it's the only place where you could ever make a rendering which should look fucked up, and then you win, except the other one around. But what was very interesting is now how deep we go, and it became a role model for a lot of different competition, because it was a competition for a project which looked like lost, and now it became like a win-win-win situation for the investor, also in terms of how it was recognized that the city, everybody of the participants is happy, etc. And the weird thing was the children made drawings, and they wanted all public space above the roofs. And strangely, because there was so much densification, there was just place on the roofs, and they were really, so right now it will be really, really interesting because they are combined with bridges, so it will be a very interesting space, but very, very low budget, obviously, etc. So I now change topic, nation, etc. We are still living, but this is also obviously, when we talk about the future of cities, and when people say we are living, 50% of the inhabitants are living in cities, it's an illusion, the pictures we have in our minds, because we think about traditional cities, but 50% are living in between cities, places which are reachable, which are part of a bigger urban environment. And this map of Italy shows it all. So this is the Pianura Padana, and these are the so-called cities. But as you see, this is the city which has been constructed. This was a very poor area of Italy in the 50s, and now become one of the most prosperous one, where the little Renaissance cities are just little islands in between this sea of transformation. And right now we are speaking about this area here, where you already see that the Alps define a territory and define problems and opportunities. So this is a project where you had to deal with that kind of landscape, and this kind of landscape is the product of a political decision. So it's not that they are so good architects, but it is just bloody politicians, which said in the 60s, you are never allowed to buy a plot on the green and build your own villa. So if you want to change architecture, you have first to have very good politicians. And this changed, this is South Tyrol, so you have North Tyrol, this is part of Austria, and if you go to North Tyrol in a summer night and you drive through it, and then you go on the border, you see complete transformation with the lights, that the regulation brought in that whereas North Tyrol is very much fragmented, South Tyrol is not, and this kind of densification of the plot brings us to a complete different kind of project. So this was an invitation for social cooperative housing. So the most banal job, so the job you never want. So like this, you study architecture because you want to build a museum, and then you get this bloody commission. And but the nice thing was when we were doing it, we could change it, and it won a lot of prizes, and it opened up a lot of doors to other things. So the key to understanding of this density model is just topography. So we were able to create a much higher density than in these row houses here, but with the possibility of everybody looking around and having a perfect view just by putting some kind of bungalows into the ground and connect them. So we have a much higher density, but it doesn't look like that. And we were able to convince the people here, this is a completely different phenomenon than the city. People are not buying together because they want happiness and sharing, no, just because they have to. So everybody wants to live with their own family on its own ground. It's just the circumstance of life that doesn't allow you to do that. So we were able here to convince them that living together could also mean something else, and that they could have big advantages in that. And the key to that is obviously the communal spaces, and the cheapest spaces for that is the public space itself. And we were able to create a public space which is shared by everybody, where everybody gives a lot of its private plot and doesn't own it, but gives it and creates another mathematical model of distribution. So this is, again, this is like social housing, more or less. You can compare it to that. And everybody has a private, this is a meadow just for this apartment. They are all completely different. They are all like little Tetris apartments. But the interesting thing was really that we were able to transform it and to make it happen as a regulation, and it become a role model for other kind of settlements which had to deal exactly with this kind of idea of low-cost living. And from that we were able to get, this is all competitions. We have just 2 times received a direct phone call, so the rest was just winning, and going back to start, which was a little bit nausing. So, but it has to do with our European Union, because certain kind of project you just can have it through competition. And this was another one, same kind of topic, but here we are able to add something more, to use old patterns, and the village has the highest density per capita of castles in Europe. And these castles are like really mega structures, but you never perceive them as that, because they use the material from the ground, which is porphyry, which is a very specific stone which makes it, the environment very solid and hot, and is the reason why there are still palms growing constantly. And we tried to translate that kind of strategy of the old houses into this new building. And also this one here, you see it, how it a little bit disappears, because we use concrete, prefabricated concrete for that. And we were able to have like the standard for social housing to work with concrete and prefabricated concrete, which we then brought in another project for Vienna as well. And so that was a very interesting experiment, which was just, we were just able to do it with the companies which were then experimenting. So this is just a really concrete house with sandwich kind of construction. So everything is already put into place. We have concrete, then you have the construction system, then you have the heat, the material which generates heat, and then you have again concrete. But here the interesting thing was that we used patterns of villages and tried to transform it into that kind of notion of space, so that it become like a very normal environment. And this kind of trying to get environment, we still continue on with other projects we are just finishing right now. But then you have also the specific case of the little house, which is the classical topic here in the same kind of village. And here we tried to convince our client. He had a certain kind of very reduced budget, and he had the problem that his sister built a house next to him. So it's not a problem socially, it's just a problem in terms of what he wanted to achieve. So he knew he has not enough money to have the same house as his sister. And so we made 2 proposals. One was the house of his sister but smaller. And then we made another proposal, which was a little bit more radical. And then we asked him, do you want the same house as your sister but smaller? Or you want to create something cheap but an experiment? And unfortunately the answer was obvious. And he started then to create this kind of experiment. So we made a house which is just made of little towers, which are just placed for one room. And then, but they become then, then they open up to a piazza in the ground floor. Then you go up, and then through kind of connections and disconnections, you go to these little rooms within the towers. But it's not very big, like square meters, but it seems very big because it has constant light and it has constant access to view, etc. And this parallelity of the object creates really a kind of a flow of things, of moving through these ideas. A very important part of that, what we're dealing with, is education. And then with the educational, with the competition for educational spaces, we were also very lucky to get in contact with highly motivated pedagogists. And this was a very specific area and a very specific approach. So we went to a village and they invited us to think about the future of the village, to think about the future of education. So like before there was even a competition just to think out, to go to the mayor, to the responsible persons and trying to figure out what is the future of a little mountain village. And we developed a strategy of using an old school and adding a new kindergarten and creating in between some public spaces. And we invented a brief and trying to understand what you could do. So the Alps have the same problem as Rome, which means they are immersed in beauty, but the houses itself are just complete shit houses, as you could find everywhere, which just the immense beauty of the mountains, which give you the illusion that everything is all right, but nothing is all right at all. But obviously there are some elements which are very interesting and where you can teach some lesson, but obviously there has been an incredible radicalization, transformation of this space, and it could become ugly, banal, and with a series of problems also of mobility, etc. So what we obviously tried was to work with that and to create a new ensemble which was made out of a primary school and a kindergarten, and the primary school was a very, very difficult, ugly building, and we just could deal with it in a certain way. So the approach was really that we were able to first of all create houses for the kids which have a different scale, which should be very clear on one side, and we created this kind of kindergarten which was also like a concrete building which looked like 3 houses, but then if you move around it becomes more ambiguous. So it looks from one side view like 3 blocks, but then if you go around it becomes a longer block, and then this longer block became slowly nature, and then you're up on the terrace, not the roof of one room, and it looks like 3 little houses, but you're standing on the building itself. And also here a tentative of working with familiarity, but then making something more estranged, like concrete and wood. And in the inside, the complete opposite, that we open up the space and making it in a very fluid environment where a lot of things have been just been accessed by the children. So we're just using the normal brief and a very solid budget, and we are putting all the moving spaces together so that they create something more, and created completely different classes for each group so that they could be conquered by the kids, and having all these kind of little spaces of education, and so that as the roof goes inside that you could touch it, so that it has all these kind of qualities of a little village itself. And then we transformed the other school, being a bigger sister or brother of the school environment, so that this very difficult block became something else. So this is the former house. So and also we had very reduced budget, and so we tried to transform it into this kind of new spaces. But the main revolution is not the architecture, but is the educational system. And the educational system brings also, throughout the autonomy of education on that region, very radical models of education into that field. So we have no traditional class anymore. The classes are completely open. Kids are moving through the classes. So the first thing was to open up all these kind of things. So there is the hidden part of which transformed the architecture is the revolution in education, and it's not a revolution in architecture. And in that sense, it was very interesting to work with that, because you're really in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, but we were able to, also throughout the communication, work very specifically on how they want to have their new kind of pedagogical program within this very difficult older environment of house. And also here a big open plan in the top floor where you could experiment, and then we were also able to put a public library, the first public library of Little Village, into that spaces as well. Another project, which was also a competition, we won, and we were very lucky also to win the gold medal of Italian architecture 1 month ago for this building. Was a very, very small town in the Alps, Val d'Ora, and a very small building, just 2 classes and a little kindergarten. The program was a kindergarten and a few spaces also for the bigger community. And the main idea of this project was based on a research of the qualities on site, and the qualities on site was that we were surrounded by frontiers and walls. So a lot of the spaces of this village is defined or by fences or by walls, and you quite never see the house itself. So that became the main idea of the building itself. So we had, for reasons of light and silence, to put the classes along that side, and then we used a strategy of walls and fences, so to make the building. So the building becomes a fence, the building becomes a fence, the fence becomes a wall, the wall becomes a building again. So yeah, as you see it here, fence becomes building, and in this kind of courtyard shapes projection, but gives also a lot of opportunities for these little spaces for the kids where they could play, where they can deposit something, and it becomes a very, very big habitat and like a living room on the outside. So again, also here, very, very small kind of spaces, and the only power which you have is to use furniture which is part of the space, because there's furniture which is given by catalogs, and the catalog is the only thing that they're paying are really terrible. So it's really, to regain the power, you have to use really walls as furniture, etc. And also here the opportunity to work with the scale of the kids, that they have more, that also if it's very, very small on paper, it gives you a lot of opportunities to work with these kind of spaces in between. And then that you find really a quality, how you go through the building, etc. So this again is the same village, and which we talked before, Caldaro. And this was our first building which we ever did. So this was really this kind of winery, and as you know, the revolution for the wines, also here it came because of a revolution in the industry of winemaking. So we are also here a little village which was had a product which was good, which had a disastrous marketing problem in the 80s, where they could not sell any wine anymore, and then they had to reinvent themselves and to make it be on top of Italy, and even some of them even of the world again. But these are made by collective organization. These are little farmers, 450 farmers, which have no idea how to put a product on a global market. They have just a little kind of ground and land, and they organize themselves in a collective, in a cooperative, and so this cooperative is now, although they are, again, small farmers, is in competition with quite big entities. So they make a competition, invite a competition which we were very lucky to win. So, and our project had the difference to the others, that they had different kind of program, which was selling the wine, the bar, the lounge, degustation, and we put it all together in one space and made a fluid transformation between these areas possible. So also here it's like a concrete solid block which is working with the idea of the monuments which you have around, and it's made of, one is concrete construction, and then it has phaser concrete plates on the outside, again because you have to create a constant circulation in the flow. And we were able, step by step, also to conquer the client to be able to make the furniture, etc. But also that was the first step, because we were completely unknown. We had to slowly make our steps of confidence, and then we were able to create this whole environment. And it's very interesting because this little village has been put really on the map of architecture, and there's a special Bauwelt number. Bauwelt is it's a very good discourse, also magazine, and in Germany, and because it was exactly how it was possible that a little village of 7,000 people was able to have this margin of architecture, and it had to deal with competition on one side and with people on ground, like Walter Angonese, which is a very brilliant architect, teaching now and Rizio, also with his little office. So this is the last bigger project I show you, which we just recently finished. We made it together with Schenker Salvi Weber, and this is the new headquarter of the Austrian Post. So it's in the middle of the city, next to Rochusmarkt. I don't know if you know the square. It's a square next to the house of Ludwig. This is the house. Sorry, where's my name? This is the house of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher, which he made for his sister. This is the Rochusmarkt, and this is the plot. Before there was just one building here, and there was a quite empty situation. So the National Post decided not to make a headquarter on the outskirts of the city, but inside, and to bring a mass of minimum 1,500 people in the city center, and not having a Mensa, so that they really spread out, they become an economical factor in the neighborhood. And parallel to that, they wanted to have a ground floor where there should be some shops. It's not a shopping center, it's just some shops, like a gallery, which you know from also in little Italian cities, there are some kind of shortcuts within the city which go through buildings. They are not like a big galleria, but really just shortcuts. And something similar happened to that. So we have the office spaces, we have a mall, and we have parking lots, so it's like a huge iceberg. And also here, it's, the classical problem of that is just a shopping mall by wording, but as a matter of fact, it's just like a galleria. And then we have an office building with all the transformation of and the revolution of that what came into the office world. So the Post is not Google. That means so the image of a post agency is that of consistency. It's something solid, and still there are enormous amount of revolutions going on. So people are, at the beginning were sending less posts, like letters, but right now through Amazon the Post is again in the business because they are sending packages around the world, and we are living in a very accelerating package or instant packaging society. So here was really the tentative to create something which is like an urban piece of, a piece of a city, and which is solid and resilient to any kind of use and needs. And it was a certain kind of program where we had to work with different kind of approaches. We experimented also on a facade which looks like a grid, but is nothing at all, because we had to deal with a problem which has to do how can we create a flow of fresh air, and how can you open windows without having problems of security. And having parallelly the constant system that you have a possibility that you look out from your working environment like a big loft, but then that you have out of the climate program that you have the feeling that you can get access to fresh air. And so we created a double facade which was made of exactly, this is the window, you open it, and then here go the air flows through, and you have, if you open a few of them, you have really an enormous wind. But then you have an enormous flexibility, and then through the shaping of that form, we created an algorithmic pattern which you just see if you see the shadow on the window, you see how it changes very rapidly in perception. And then we had a lot of artists which we were invited to work with the space, and we were able to convince the client to invite also young artists, but the main thing was really that we have to have works of art which you cannot put away, that nobody can steal them in a certain way. And then we had the older building, and we made a cut between the old and the new, which became then the place of communication within the building. So where you have the meeting spaces and the little bars, well, not the mensa, just the bars of every flanker next to that, and you have always the direct communication. There's with the space, with artwork, etc. So enormous flexibility on one side, and then you have the revolution in the office world, where you have people which have not a fixed desk, but where you try to create an environment which enables you to go around, find quiet places, etc. But again, not a playground for kids like in Google, but for people which are having, they are working for a more serious brand which has to communicate something else. But nevertheless, in the end, it's based on the same kind of system. So it becomes a solid part of the ground. So this is the last project I show you. And it's a reflection of a few kind of approaches already. It's architecture, it's a social strategy, it's urbanism. And it was an invitation, and it's like 0.000% of the project which we have seen before in terms of budget. This is a project which costed 10,000 euros. And we were invited by curators in the middle of the Abruzzi, which is which are the other, next to the Alps, the other main mountain part of Italy, in a very poor area, shaped and shaped by a lot of migration. So it's really into the heart of the peninsula, but dominated by big migration flows. So the biggest migration flows came obviously at the end of the 19th century, where people had to escape poverty and made the big trip to the United States, to Australia, to Argentina, etc. And never came back, obviously. And then in the 50s, with the invention of a new Italy, where Italy posed its attention also to industrialization, the big track which went to Torino and Milano, and to shape a new future. And then in the 60s and 70s, the migration to Switzerland, Germany, Austria. So this brought us a lot of consequences of the territory. So we had the creation of two types of ruins. One side was the ruins of the things that people leave the spaces, and the second one was the second ruin, which was just by the initiative of the migrants itself. So a lot of people went to Germany and they wanted to come back. So the first money they used, they invested them first to build something on the ground, the first fundaments, and maybe a few walls. And then slowly, it should have been a house. But obviously, they themselves did not return, and the kids became Germans or Austrians or inhabitants of London and never came back. So you have also this kind of new territory which is shaped by a wish of transformation, of a promise which will never happen. And then in this enormous acceleration of the 20th century, all of these areas obviously have been taken out of the transformation of the areas itself. So, but if you go there on site, you find, we expected province, but we found something completely different. So 750 people live in Latina, and they are in mail contact, not email, mail contact with 700 families which are living abroad. The Galla Matese had 5,000 inhabitants 50 years ago, now it has 700. But just the New York community of Galla Matese on San Antonio, which is the 13th of June, which is the main saint of that village, is celebrating in the streets of New York. So it's really a parallelity of works. And our friends of Stalker once made a project by just showing the flags on every house where everybody is right now, where the kids, the cousin, everybody which has born in this house is living, and there were flags of 43 nations. So that's the complete opposite of, in rich counties you go in village and everybody stays there and has its own Porsche Cayenne and goes to Seychelles, but here you have the complete opposite. You have something which is connected throughout the world to very basic kind of elements. And also they were telling us we had to work with 10 people, more or less, but then we had 87 which were working with us, and it became a project with, which came out something completely different than what we expected. Also here, Mario, a normal worker, lived 6 years in Switzerland, 9 years in Rhode Island. His family is still there, and he's also this glue between these two nations. So it's not top managers only which are connected in the world, but obviously a lot of these kind of other spheres of society which are grounded in two parts of the world, and they're making the connection possible. If you want to understand how to deal with space, you have to understand social space. So this was before crisis. At the age of 25, 50% of Italian women and 70% of Italian men are living at their parents' home. But that doesn't just mean that they are not courageous. No, it has to do that there is no market for rental spaces. So it's a society where you own things, and to own things it takes much more longer. And if you have a society where people are owning things, means there's also distrust against the state. And obviously Italy has a history of not trusting a space, and for good reasons. And so as you remember, there was once this big tension in Europe when they were showing how much property every family, as a pro family we have in Europe. We had 75,000 euros in Germany of property per family, and we had 260,000 in in Spain, Italy, and a little bit less in Greece. So there was a big kind of shouting. But you have to understand that these 260,000 euros are the costs for living, for hospitals, etc., which the state doesn't guarantee in the south. But that has other consequences. Just 20% of the housing market consists of rental housing. And that creates completely different kind of biography. And so there's a good reason why there's an old Fiat Uno on that image. If you want to have sex at the age of 20, you need to have a car, because there is no intimacy if not in this little cell of the flexible environment. So, but this has all to do with this kind, that so there are biographies which are shaped by space problems. So mass tourism obviously is something which transformed Italy. Some say to its worst, some say to its best. The reality obviously lies in the middle. But it's also a big opportunity for all the areas which have not been yet discovered. Shrinking was put by Philip Oswald on the discourse of architectural theory in the middle of the 90s, speaking about Germany's shrinking cities in the east, but obviously it's a phenomena which has to do with all the winners of the former empire. So the empires were shaped around the sun, but right now the empires are in the areas where they have invented the fridge. And then we had the new mobility for very cheap aims. So 200 euros bring you somewhere, and these are all the opportunities to create a project. So everything you see is post-production. When we were on site, we had no computer with us. We just had to decide, and we were in a certain way surprised by the events on site. We just had to react, and we had just a package of tools, and we had experience with us. So we were 5 persons. I was constantly on site, and then there were always 1 or 2 of my partners being with me there 1-2 weeks. And then we had this kind of 87 persons. And we had just a concept, but no idea what to do with it. So this is Prato Sanita Inferiore, which is a kind of medieval town shaped by non-architects. And these were the pictures which I did when I was first invited there for the first time. And I could not imagine that this was exactly the area which we would work with. So a lot of the areas were abandoned and seen as a moment of loss. Spaces with a hidden kind of beauty. And then we had this parallelity of 2 pieces of this town. One was the medieval city, and this is the streets, which evokes already the situationist idea of adventure in the city. And then we have the newer part of the city, which was shaped by the horse and then by the car. Obviously different kind of streets, where they are just like 5 minutes walk away. So in 1920, there was a lot of big families living there which have gone away. And this obviously mathematically brings you to a complete different heritage system. So if all of these people would love to have still property, with this very small amount of property, everybody would just have a few square decimeters of things. But as all the places were interconnected because they built one to each other, the municipality had to take care of the buildings, because if one breaks down, everything in a certain way breaks down. So we came there with the idea of a diffuse hotel. A diffuse hotel is very similar to the idea of that what has been put then into reality a few years later with a high effort, like take 5 million euros, you buy a village, and then all the inhabitants become just kind of little service industry for the tourists. And we wanted to make something different. We wanted to use the metaphor of the diffuse hotel as something to bring potential into that area. A hotel is nothing else than an agglomeration of a lot of cells which are private, which we call the rooms. Then we have half-private services around it, and then we have an interconnection. And you can put it in one building, but you can also put them around. So what we did, we developed with them a strategy how we could transform a few spaces with this really ridiculous amount of money into inhabitable installations, and so that they could continue also this project and this project. So when we first came on site, we were thinking we just have to map the project. We make some colors, helping them to make a map, and then we open some rooms. But they were really serious about it, and they showed us some rooms, and we were shocked, and we had to act like doctors in front of heavy ill patients, telling that everything is going to be all right, but we had absolutely no clue. So we just started and tried to conquer time by opening up these areas, cleaning them, and parallelly we invented the space. But what is very interesting, as we had no meter and no measurement, no CAD files, it's very interesting how you communicate. You will go really back to the idea of self-similarities. So because you say, this room is like 3 kind of arms long, so nobody of you would ever say, make it 1.712 arms long, so it's just 1.5 or nothing. And that creates objects and proportion which are not perfect, but at least similar. And you could open up in a really deeper discussion about aesthetics also there. But it allowed us also to be very flexible, but very fast. So we had to save money, we had to save goods. So this was this is the rock, this is the cave, this was used for the sheep. This was another part of the cave. We put it together as one, used that material and made of every room an architectural topic. So it was like nation building at its best in a certain way. So we shaped together this kind of society, and we became really, really good friends. And so this was the first space finished. This was the Spazio Argento, one space where you could already sleep. Very cool, obviously, in summer, because the stones are making a really cool temperature. This was the typical, it was like in these horror movies, like don't open the door, because behind there was really this kind of disaster. So this was the last room in a huge tower, and everybody of us having a minimum of static education sees this is a huge problem. So we have to put an effort, money there, and then, but we try to transform it also there into something else. Made this project happen also to a lot of social strategies, the T-shirt which we are making together, then the bathroom, and we are really interested in the power of the everyday. So there are some elements which survived for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, which looks completely banal, but we are really interested in that. And this, for example, is la mosquera. I don't know the term in English, and I don't know it even in German. So one of the most intelligent inventions of humankind, to let the air go through and let the flies outside. No? So normally complete kitsch, but very efficient. And so we ask ourselves, what is happening if you put 4.8 kilometers of that into something else? And we made a bathroom which was like a forest of these kind of elements, where you then achieve just a moment of privacy. And it has also to do with the Italian tradition of shame, that you don't show everything. I know it's paradox if you know what the women around Berlusconi are doing, but in terms of, there are always two Italies, no? One officially is about shame. Sexuality is based on the little element you put on you and not on everything naked. So it has also to do with that. And I don't tell you how difficult it is on the 15th of August, when whole Italy is on holiday, to find 4.8 kilometers of that. But the interesting part of the project is that everybody has a cousin, which has a brother, which uncle is the son of the other brother, which has a company owned 50 kilometers away. So we were able to receive this kind of things. So at the end, we had really this project finished. And this was the last room, and then we calculated how much they worked for free for that. And it was an incredible amount of money which was behind that because of their will. to do so. And everybody shaped it also with their own skills. And then it was finished after 24 days. So this is the flying bed, as we were calling it. So you go on it and then you put it out slowly. And then you are really sleeping above the stars, but really, again, really, really cheap. And so it back to the picture of the abandoned place before. So it was really this transformation of the space. And then we went on, then they asked the curators to invite us again. Then we transformed also part of the public space. We made a stair house in the literal sense of the word, which is that one here, where they made the first cinema on site. So it then started to work, and it was not perceived as a project. So we were invited to make a project for one summer, but strangely, it continued to work for a few years. Then a few of these people, obviously, because that's the nature of things, the young people went away, and some of the old ones died. So it went down for a little bit, and now what is interesting is that a lot of the people returned to the place itself. And we once, because on the second year, again, we had to put it on market for tourism, and we had no budget for that. And we were like anthropologists which were too deep into the matter. So we were really happy on site, but we had no clue, is it good or not? Because it works socially. But so we said, okay, we take a little bit of the budget, we invite curators and journalists which we trust in terms of, if it's bad, please don't tell it. You have never been here, we don't speak about it anymore. If it's good, spread the voice. And they were all super enthusiastic, fortunately. But if you take it and as a marketing strategy, just this article in Standard, if you would have one of the main newspapers in Austria, if you would have this as advertisement, it's like 65,000 euros. So that means 6.5 hotels. And so this was also a strategy to bring just people which were willing to go into an adventure to be there. And if we would ever have said to the mayor of Prater Sanita that he would be on a cover with Weil am Rhein, Osaka, Barcelona, Munich, what is this Grand Canyon Resort, they would have put us into the madhouse, but strangely it worked. It was really highly promoted without any kind of budget. Then we were invited to the Max in Rome for the exhibition called Recycle. And then we wanted to tell the story also to the ones which had done it. And we have made a kind of a library, which is also bed, which is fitting perfectly in the amphitheater, which was done in Prater Sanita with the inhabitants. And then we brought it to the big museum in Maxi, and then we're putting it there. And right now, two of the really brilliant guys of the village have gone to a very special economic faculty, but they are brave enough to go back to Prater Sanita, and we were really curious because they wanted to restart this kind of thing as a tool to communication, and we are looking forward how it works. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a brilliant, very interesting lecture. As usually, now it's time for you to ask questions, our dear guests. But perhaps till we start, because sometimes it takes a while. I would ask Ian, I have been there in Prater Sanita, as you remember, been there together. My question would be if it was somehow inspiring for the other villages there, because this is not only the problem of that particular village, but there are several like this.
I think, yes, for some it worked, but what I found, it went on for a few years, but it's really incredibly dependent. For me, the interesting and the frustrating was it all depends on, how can I say, these little villages, or like every village where you can make a difference, depend on a few people. If these are there, you can make miracles. If they are going away, everything is going down. So there was one where something was going on, which was really interesting because there was a young mayor pushing it forward, trying to put there. But here there was a moment where it was really frustrating for us because a new mayor came and everything which the former administration has done, it's like in big politics the same. So it's crap. And then and you put the attention into the other. So that was really difficult. And therefore, it was the civic society which continued it. That was interesting, because the problem was really, this is the area which has now been globally shown to the world. That is what you see in Gomorrah. It's very not far away from there. So this was the complete opposite. This was innocent. And you remember, when we were making the trip, because I suggested that we have to go from Capri to Napoli to Secondigliano, etc. So when we were going through the area, nobody of us could imagine how this area became a symbol afterwards globally for hypercrime. But I think that's the interesting thing. Is really it's about people in the biological, mathematical sense of the word. You need a certain kind of amount of people to stay there, to return there, so that they make a difference. I think right now this is an interesting moment, because it has to do also with some phenomena which have shown up in the Alps, that there are new moments there, that technology creates opportunities in terms of work, because there are other areas where they have like a complete absurd call centers, so at least people are remaining, and there are farmers parallel, and 6 hours the young are in these call centers, which are just hidden in normal houses. And so I think, because this was just a project which is part of other project, and I think, it has to do with a lot of things. But majors believed in it. That was interesting. But I think it's a very difficult territory, nevertheless. And the problems of the territory itself, you are competing against bigger phenomena, and sometimes it's a bigger entities which are solving the phenomena. It's like with Airbnb. Like just with the possibility of putting things into Airbnb and all the guarantee that makes, it offered in a lot of the things of the South a potential of a hidden economy. Everything which is big, a new factory, the crime comes and asks the money, but everything which is invisible creates also opportunities for these areas. And I think unfortunately you have to deal with these kind of things. But for us, the miracle was already the social involvement. Everybody was telling us in the different villages that there was never a moment when all the generations spoke to each other and made a project together. And that was, for me, it was interesting, because it was not just about us. I mean, there's a certain power of architecture itself, or building something. And I always thought that the metaphor of the Tower of Babylon was completely wrong. Because the metaphor is that they are shaping the little tower. They want to go up in the height and to speak to God. And then God comes and destroy them by putting them onto different languages. But I think it's completely opposite. It's all different languages which are constructing a tower together, and it's the tower which unifies them in a certain way. So if you go in a small thing, if you go to a construction site, it's the same, but also in terms of by making things together. And architecture is a very interesting tool, which everybody understands strangely, because we had Japanese collaborators, etc. And for me that was interesting. There was something hidden behind it, and I wrote then a longer research, which was learning from Pater Snita, where I tried to understand why did it work. I'm not sure if I'm right on that, but still it's an interesting question, why it happened and why it did work.
I mean, the role of the architect was really crucial there. Mm-hmm. Not somehow underestimate the local people, but they have been there already before you.
Exactly.
Nothing happens.
Yeah. No, you're right.
But there might be a good idea with generating a bitcoins there, because it's a quite good job. So.
Yeah. No. But again, I think these are people, areas for creative people in a certain way. How do you go there and what do you do there?
Anyway, it's quite interesting that the situation in Italy in quite many characteristics is very similar to Slovakia. Mm-hmm. Comparing the situation with housing, I mean, in Slovakia it's quite similar. You do have very low percentage of social housing or rental housing, and then everybody just wants to own their flat, which is extremely difficult. So.
Yeah. No, but it's understandable. Again, it's completely different than in Vienna, but also Vienna is completely different from Innsbruck, etc. No, it's just Vienna that has this model, which you can look at it and say it's interesting, but obviously you have to have a very specific political situation to make it possible. At least what is interesting, in my opinion, is that also on the wish how people would like to live, also in the city. Also, if it's ownership, it's also okay, because also there are some flats which we made were not just rental space but also private spaces. So it's more like the idea of what do you want if you live in a city, and the kind of service packages, which was the part of the revolutionary package of the social housing program since 100 years of Vienna, with all the space of communication and the new development parallelly of the niche product of Baugruppen, like where everybody wants to live together in a specific way and tries to find alleys how we can have a swimming pool, etc. So that this creates a new normality in the market, so that, and a higher standard, so that people already take it for granted what they all want to have in their house, and that makes it, but it still makes it very interesting. But it's in Vienna, what is strange is that there are official master plans, but if investors are coming and saying we want to take our attention here, they change the master plan, and so it's really the housing projects which are then putting ideas of the city and how the city is formed into the ground, and I think that there is an enormous responsibility of the architects itself.
By the way, how many percentage of your work belongs to housing?
Right now, a lot, but just because we won very big competitions for that, so it's hard to say.
Like half? Or
More. Right now, more. But before it was not like that. It was just a moment when we just really expanded because.
Do you think that you just enter the group of the designers of housing, or this is the general situation with the building industry?
No, right now it was interesting that we were able with our approach to win. So that means there is a certain tendency. We were invited, we have grown bigger. I've even become now professor exactly for housing. And I think so in terms of, I have now a huge instrument to analyze exactly also this kind of phenomena. No, but I think this kind of overlapping of different ideas, there's a very specific moment, and obviously you have a market of mass production, obviously, but there is a very interesting phenomena of interesting urbanistic and housing projects going on. Still the problem is just how one is to win it, and then the detail. There is a big. The problems are also the companies which are building the stuff. So.
Perhaps it's really a kind of changing of paradigm inside the thinking about housing.
Yeah, no, it is. I think we need a lot of infiltration. I think Vienna is conceptually interesting, but we need a lot of more of playing with sensuality, materiality, experiments. So there is still you can a lot of do. I'm not. Yeah.
I mean, the project in Hamburg you have done, and then São Paulo, this is something exciting. I couldn't imagine that.
Exactly. Here. But also, I could not imagine that happening in Vienna.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's also interesting. And also, there are some. Also in Italy, there are certain parts. Also, Italy, it's made of islands. You know, if you go look at Milan, it's completely different from Rome. Rome is completely different from Napoli, and every of these has very specific possibilities or non-possibilities, and I think also that what is happening right now in Milan is also very interesting as a completely different kind of strategy. In Rome you have a disastrous situation for housing, but also there it's interesting how you could, with new concept, you could make a difference. I think it's, I think the point is just if we put all how we put them all on the table and have a further discussion. I think that's the most important part, how we are able to communicate with power.
Yeah, that's true.
And
this is actually visible on all of the projects to invent very successful strategies. Actually.
Yeah.
Questions, please. Dear students and guests and whoever you are.
I'd like to know how does it work from like the studio in Vienna to get connected with the town in Italy? If you have some like a personal connection or were you called by the village and maybe were you paid or volunteer?
Yeah. So it's all a lot of coincidences. So the southern Italian project, for example, it just came by invitation. So we had made a lot of projects in Sao Paulo, in China, and they were published, which had to do with public space. No? And so they approached us and they were asking if we would also work in a rural context. And we said, no problem, because most of our parts, we are even coming from villages. You know, the most convinced city inhabitants are sometimes coming from completely different spatial situations. So these were all invitations. But for others, I think the point is exactly how do you get a commission, no? And how do you get in charge of something. In other parts of Italy, like in the north, we made a lot of competition. We check out the competition, and we are going also to some villages and trying to make future laboratorium. So like, what's the future of your village in 20 to 30 years? Also to get in contact with the reality, and then step by step, sometimes something happens, but sometimes some really profound kind of analysis and sometimes also master plans are coming out. So we are trying to get different kind of approaches to things. So, but most of the things have just been by invitation or by competitions. So it's and the first project we did just by ourselves. We just invented the project, the task, and tried to get to that. I would love to make more of that we found an easier way. But some projects, by regulation, you cannot do it differently. Unfortunately. But that's what I think what the point is, that we are really interested in persons, in terms of that I think one part of that project, but also of the other project we had on ground, we like to talk with people, and we are really, in terms of, we are sincerely naive and interested in certain kind of things. And I see that maybe they see that, and there is that we give them respect, and I think that's also a crucial point of how some communication can start and that some process can start. And I'm quite sure, because we were the only ones in that project, because there were 10 other projects which were more in the arts, they had 3 people working with them, and we had 10, 15, 20, and the end 87. That means something, no? But we are also able to communicate, but not because I think because we had real interest. And for us, some of the most interesting things have now to do really with the transformation of the countryside. So things which are normally not so visible. And I think there's an enormous potential also. And I see it has also to do with the curricula of students. Normally you go to a city, you remain the city, and obviously if city like Vienna offers you a growth, you remain the city because there's a market. But what is also very interesting, how rural landscape have changed with technology, and how, I know it also from South Tyrol. So I have grown up there, and also one of my partners, and we left because there was no opportunity, and you could just make bloody hotels which looked like farmhouses, gigantic ones, and so it had nothing to do with architecture at all. But then, right now, it's amazing what you can do, what kind of life biographies are possible, what kind of new entrepreneurs are working in this kind of fields. We are now together with a designer of cars, which was head of Pininfarina, and now works on its own to work on the mobility of these areas, because that's also a crucial point. And then you find out that in little valleys you have automotive industry which produces 1.5 million euro a year. So sometimes it's really interesting, and what this kind of transformation of reality brings for these areas. And you have to deal with mayors of little towns of 700 which are highly educated, strangely, because they return, they see the potential, they are young, And so sometimes you have to do with more educated people in these villages than with city administration. It's really a fact, really strange. Not with always, it's just, there's a shifting. Some remains complete dark province, that's true. Sometimes remains rich and arrogant tourism villages, but there are others which are very, very interesting. And that's, I think there's also an opportunity that you go there where you also have some connections, because the market, it's also bad to speak about market because you don't enter a faculty with the word of market. No, you just have to know that afterwards you have to find possibility and clients. No, and that's. But I think that there are a lot of opportunities right now, in my opinion, and it's yeah. It's. I think it's also very interesting to find these places out of the box.
Actually, it was also a topic of the Italian exhibition at Biennale right now. This
exactly.
kind of out of the traditional centers.
Exactly.
And dealing with the country, so perhaps you can have a look.
Yeah. Because VIedni, Italy, for example, made one analysis how many companies have direct access and how do they communicate. And this is really interesting. It was just Alpine regions, which have 3 times higher per capita than Milan. And so it's very interesting to look at certain phenomena which are arising, and you find a lot of people which are thinking very similar to you, but they are working in different fields, and they're finding also opportunities in places which are not a typical city, and I think that's really, really super, super interesting.
At the beginning of your speech, you mentioned that your project, you started actually with a one-by-one project. What does it mean, one-by-one project?
It means that we had, yeah, exactly. We were complete naive idiots. We had no diploma, and we had no space in the university to work. No, so that's also the bad thing of the Technical University of Vienna was there wasn't enough space for people. And now you could say, Darwinistically speaking, okay, it generated a new scene because people desperately tried to find cheap places outside where they could work together. So it happened to us. No? And we started in a studio situation just because we wanted something to work with. Then we had we had to finish our study, which took ages because we then started our office. And then we we didn't want to wait until the big commission happened. And then it was very interesting structurally. We had 3 universities, TU Vienna, Angewandte Akademie, and all of them had a little kind of different hidden curricula, what kind they produce. So they had, and that years you had Angewandte, and when you followed a certain class, so you had the opportunity, you worked then for Kengo Kuma and you go to Japan, which was obvious, no? You take the trip, but some of them get lost on that trip because they went worldwide but never started an office, no? Some others, the academy was already changing in that sense, and the TU was like a supermarket with some very brilliant, we have MVR, the VZ and Peter Cook, people, but you, like the Clash song, in their song you can get lost in a supermarket, and that happened to a lot of people. So, and there, but it was interesting that the new scene of Austria really formed in that school, and which is not saying that the school is good, it just says that some survived, like let's say, but I believe still that you can make really better situations. But as a matter of fact, we had this working space, and then we started to make little projects, which we called one-to-one. We had an idea, we didn't want to make Photoshop of some areas, but we wanted to go out and become dirty, no? So it's very similar to the idea. There is the book by Paul Valéry, Eupalinos and the Architect, and there's a special moment. This is the speech of a philosopher and an architect. And there's a crucial moment when the architect says, I cannot continue just to make theoria. No? Theoria means that you look at the world without being in touch with it. Some call it television, but that would be too cynical. So that you can really, in a certain way, but that it means that you have to make a mistake. You make a cut and you go into reality and you make a decision, unfortunately, that splits the world into black and white because you made that cut. And we wanted to become in a certain way, we wanted to try something out, and we made this kind of project in public space where we found the fundings. We wanted to work in the Museumsquartier. So we made a lot of things which we have not been educated to. I said it was like 15 years ago. So there were just a few phenomena popping out in different cities, in Berlin, some then in Paris, and we then got in contact with them. But at the beginning, we had nothing, and we produced a lot of this work parallelly. And after 1 year, when we were in this really isolated situation, we won the National Award of Experimental Architecture, and we knew, okay, we are not crazy. So there is a discourse around it, and from that on, it started to become differently. And parallel to that, we had the phenomenon that we are just working on temporary projects, and I deeply remember when we were invited to a competition, and one famous architect said, "What are you doing here? You're just making temporary project." So in us there was this "fuck you," and we make you the most solid monolith you could ever see. And then we won again that kind of competition for the wine center, and then parallelly we then won a lot of architecture stuff. So, but it was a very personal revenge against that, say. But again, that was the point, was just to go out and to find clients. It happens a little bit similar with some project in urban approach, but I think we have to make it more. So we failed a little bit in not to having more of that, because then we want competition and then you get lazy, because you have the illusion that this is work, you know. So we are making like 17 to 25 competition a year, and obviously we just win, if we win some very 2 or 3, but obviously these 2 or 3 are big and helps you. But the problem is we had once already some competition, and that's a very dangerous situation, because you could never win any competition in your life again. No? So this is, but it is the illusion that you work on something. You work, you draw. It looks like work because it's completely the same as architecture work, just you don't get money out of it. And you have 10 hours of work and it looks perfect, looks like a house. But then obviously, you're not paid for that. And we have an enormous amount of money which we are losing every year. And if you know that, it's always good. We are controlling a lot of our steps. We have a constant conscious, we have super digital programs which are controlling every step, also every art project. So that doesn't mean that we don't do it for free. We just know that we are doing it for free in terms of it's just a matter of conscious. But I think that's exactly the point. It's how, I think the main problem is just how you get a commission. I think that's, and how are the rules of that, unfortunately. So that's really the painful reality. Afterwards we can speak about the quality of architecture, but I think I think that what you should achieve is really a clever way to get commissions. I think because that's, unfortunately, it's the key. It's the key to everything. And we were lucky, but we could have much better ways. I think there are people which are making much better ways, and so.
I think you shouldn't complain.
No, I said I don't complain, but it has to do with circumstances, maybe with quality, but I don't know. But it has also to do with luck, and yeah. But anyway, I think it's important. Therefore, this one-to-one approach was very nice, because we started with nothing, and we were able to achieve a certain kind of portfolio with low-budget projects. But we had one rule: we never work for free. Also, if you just earn that much, then somebody which sells you a rose. That was the first, that was the hourly wage we had at the beginning, but there was a dignity on that we say, okay, but we have to get this 7 or whatever, this very small amount of money. And yeah.
Okay, please, some more questions from your side.
It seems like you don't, it's difficult to get some jobs still, but it seems like you don't compromise. Like you have a really focus to do something that is socially beneficial. I really admire it. Like it's not easy, but I'm just wondering, were you in a situation in the past that when you had a developer who really wanted something cheap and squeeze some square meters, that you had to educate him, or you?
Yeah, sure. With all of this, we never had the economical situation where we could easily say no to something, and so we tried to make always our best. So it was never a wish catalog, so absolutely never. But it was very interesting exactly in that we say, okay, how can we change this into something else? And as you said, how can we work? We had also a project with developer where we really had to fight, and we're successful. But I think you are successful when your belief is shareable in a certain way. And I'm quite sure that everything that has to do with a good city is shareable in a certain way, also in terms of value. It's just a matter of price. Also, they want happy people which are living there because they are also happy clients in a certain way. And I think there is some common ground on that. How can you work with that? But obviously there are some things which we are refusing also to do in terms of. But again, first we think really what is the potential of a brief, and how can we try to make it happen in a positive way. But it's a very difficult question. But there are some other topics which you refuse. But we refused not in terms of program, but we refused also for money reason. For example, if somebody asked 7% of, if you enter in a competition where people were getting a job because they are ordering so low, we were going out of a competition and making official, because we believe that if we start a competition like that, we destroy the whole system. So we lost a lot of commissions already from the beginning, because we thought we cannot work with that amount of things, because we know exactly more or less how much time we need for some certain kind of amount, and it's already included that we work for you twice or three times as much as you would ask to do it, because we believe in it and we have a benefit because we like the job, and but I think the biggest taboo is the money, and the biggest taboo also in art university is the money. So if you are founded by the state, it's no problem, but if private sponsors are giving you art competition, so it's a very difficult topic, which has to do with, but a very interesting topic, which has to do what do you perceive as value and what not. And I think it's exactly, if you don't speak about money, people are getting the illusion. So we speak at this also if we come much more from a poetic approach to life. But I think it's interesting to go to the enemies in terms of, it's like, if you want to understand the city, you have to understand the city like a military thinker and a policeman, no? If you want to change something. So it's always interesting to go to the dark side of things, because just in the whole you get it. And therefore I think it would be interesting to go to I think the money issue should be discussed in a broader thing, because if not, people get the illusion, how is it possible that somebody makes so fancy things already 1 year after he finished university, and then you find out, okay, he came from a very wealthy background. He went to university where he spent 500,000 euros. So, I think that you should speak about the real truths of certain things. Also to make biography is not impossible. If you never know how certain things happened, you are really frustrated as a young architect, because you think, I will never be able to achieve it, and then you understand what kind of economical power is behind certain careers, and what kind of non-economical powers is behind some other careers. And so that's also interesting. Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright came from poor background. So nevertheless, they were able to achieve something. That doesn't mean it's not good how they did it, but it's also just interesting how you compare it. But it would be more interesting to fight for the rights again to survive. I mean, the quality of architecture has to deal with the time you are able to spend on a project, and if you have not enough money to subsidize that time, then you have a problem, yeah. And I think that it's a little bit out of our sphere, but it's also a little bit our responsibility. And I think that's one lesson. Maybe sometimes I'm not such a big fan of. I think there are some interesting phenomena in Vienna. There are also some very bad phenomena in Vienna, but there was one very interesting phenomena which I would really give as an advice to every young architect afterwards. So in Vienna we have very hard regulation to be able to, to sign an architecture project. It's still an old echo from the empire, where how it's called, the civil engineer was like the bourgeois way to achieve the power like a count. And so it's very difficult to get that sign system. It's the most difficult one in Europe, and it's nothing to be proud of. And there was an organization of the young architects starting also 15 years ago, which would never have the possibility to get that kind of sign. And they tried to make their little offices and try to find a way of communicating this other. And they find an interesting, it's called IG architecture, which means group of interests of architecture. And first of all, throughout the web, they established a certain kind of information pool. How did you do it? But that most importantly, they established an ethic and a politics of shame in terms of if you're making projects for free, the community is pissed off with you if they hear it, that you make it. You know, that you start to make, I think shame is a very important element of social communication, unfortunately. But so that at least the community itself started to know that we're destroying ourselves if we are working for that amount of money. And the only way to do it is to strike in a positive way, so that at least you have certain kind of boundaries. But I think it has nothing to do with project, but I think unfortunately it is directly related to the quality of projects. If you don't have money and time, yeah, just heroes without families can survive, and there are just a few mad people left.
Yes, and you can survive for a very short time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sustainable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sleeping audience. No questions today. Okay. If there are no, I would still have one. Yes. This was regarding the aspekt project, because you said that Jan Gell is the author of the conception of using the public space. But you said that he adopted some of your ideas. So
the idea was
what he took.
Yeah, the idea was that the administration, so they started already with the project of informal spaces, and that they made really a budget for a project which would happen on site before in the free spaces. So because before it was this former airplane area, so they made some projects on that site where they started to really to activate it and to make it open for really much more crazy experiments. It's just a pity because there could be so much more. And but Jan Gell made a kind of a very good but a classical approach, that he used segments of the city, and now they transformed them with landscape architects of 13.0, and they are making it. But then the administration itself, they started with this kind of strategy of using temporary approaches to get exactly this kind of pioneers there, so that they open it up to the broader discussion who should go there, and that a part of the creative industry of Vienna sees it as a potential. And right now, I'm very lucky to be in the jury of Art in Public Space in Vienna. So that means we have 5 jury members, and we are acting a little bit like curators. Like we have 3 years of possibilities, and it was a very interesting group which has been chosen, and we are exactly now working with a lot of very famous artists and very young conceptual artists on different areas on the city, which really large-scale artistic interventions, which go from social large-scale but also to really big impact. And Aspern, for example, it's really seen as this wild northeast in a certain way, where you could really experiment something, and you should experiment something. And it's just crazy that you have a city where you could have so much energy flowing in, but everybody's just looking at, nobody looks at the forest anymore. Just looking at the little trees, about the details of the trees, and that they're pissed off that the tree is not having that shape. So, but I think there's still a lot of things going on. I'm just afraid that it gets boring, and that's the problem. Yeah. And not by coincidence, some philosophers have put the word boring in the reign of evil. Yeah.
Okay, so if there are no more questions from your side, I'm quite disappointed about this. Whatever.
And there are never wrong questions. That's also.
Yes, no questions are wrong actually. But as one of my older colleagues told me a few days ago, that he is always like, to his students, he always say, okay, do you think that you are so clever that you don't need to ask? Or do you think that I'm so stupid that you cannot offer me any question? But, okay, I'm not that kind of authority than him, so I will not say this. Anyway, I mean, you have given us a wonderful overview of your work and beautiful thoughts about architecture, so I would like to thank you once again for coming.
Thank you very much.